first Student Perspectives discussion. We have some really great panelists here with us today, ready to share their stories. And just so everyone's aware, we did create a handout with all of our students, our panelists' information, including their names, pronouns, programs, involvements, so that you can get a brief overview of our panelists so that we can jump straight into the questions. Lauren, my colleague, is here, and she is putting it in the chat for you all to view as our panelists are speaking. Some of you have met me already. My name is Liz Bañuelos Castro. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Internship and Diversity Programs Advisor here at USC's Career Center. And I will let Lauren and Ella briefly introduce themselves before we start.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lauren Ochenorth. I'm the Associate Director of Internship Engagement. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And delighted to see everyone here. I'll get back to the chat. Thanks. Over to Ella.
Hi everyone, my name is Ella. My pronouns are she or hers. I'm a grad intern here at the Career Center, and I'll just be note-taking for today's meeting.
Thank you both, Lauren and Ella. I appreciate you both introducing yourselves, and with that, we're going to get straight into the panel. Today we have with us Hugo, Michelle, Destiny, Terrell, and Shreya as our panelists. And with that, we'll get started with Destiny. If you can start us off with, what do you look for in an organization when applying to internships and jobs?
Yes, so the very first thing that I look for is this team/organization diverse? When I go on the website and I see these marketing materials, do I see BIPOC people? Do I see women there? The second thing I look for are they covering diverse materials? So this is industry specific, but for me, I work in entertainment. So are we covering content that, appeals to BIPOC people? Are there any BIPOC people that are in leadership positions? When I go on LinkedIn, I go on the website, do I see people who are SVPs, executives, senior vice presidents, directors? Are they BIPOC people? And lastly, do they speak out in times of controversy and distress within marginalized groups? So we all know what happened in 2020 with Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, and there were a number of companies, organizations that were speaking out against what was happening. And I feel like that's important to me and to my marginalized group because I do feel that silence is enabling and it does speak volumes.
I would like to piggyback off of what Destiny said. Terrell here. I think definitely seeing what leadership looks like, what the board looks like is super important, right? Because that's going to be the governance, that's going to be the policies, that's going to be how the employee knows their rights almost, And also I've learned in my 10+ year mini career to really learn the HR policies and practices of the organization, and that does involve DEI and seeing who represents the organization and how they have responded to social causes and social actions that are activated or happening, and what changes have they led within marginalized communities as well.
I can go next. So as a pre-health student, I'm typically looking for organizations that show me that I can have a direct impact on communities around me, and that organizations are working with those communities and not just designing solutions that are for them. So I'm really looking for something that can kind of create a dialogue with them and show me that I can take more initiative if possible. I think programs that do have specific mentorship opportunities, especially with people that have identities similar to mine, are also really great because it kind of shows me that they are existing in the organization, and it's more than just in the recent grads. You can see that there's an upward sort of path for people, and it's not just kind of a stepping stone. So that's been really important. But overall, just kind of showing that there are opportunities to kind of even give feedback, and it's not sort of a very rigid structure. But yeah, all of those are very positive signs.
I can go next. I think something I really try to look at is just how big the organization is in general. I think it speaks a lot to, you know, the type of resources that they have and just kind of the impact that they can make on the community. Obviously from like smaller businesses, like I wouldn't really expect like big, like $1 million investments in different like social movements, but if I am looking for a more bigger business, like are they doing what they need to do to help their community, help the people that they're impacting, not just like stockholders, but just all the people that they're affecting. I think it also speaks to a lot of the growth opportunities that are out there, and that's something I really look for personally, because I know in like my work style, I really need to have multiple things to kind of stay challenged, stay stimulated, and really focus on growing professionally. I think also pay is really important. It kind of shows, you know, the institutional support that I would be getting. If I'm getting paid more, that means, you know, there's more investment in my like career growth, and there's more investment from just like people who are like supervising me, and they'll be taking my like impact a little bit more seriously and kind of valuing my role in the company.
I can go next. Hi, everybody. Hugo Munoz. Great to be here. Liz, thank you so much for reaching out. I appreciate everybody for being on the call. So just a few thoughts. I definitely look for opportunities for growth. And as Michelle mentioned, sort of this transparency as far as salary for each of the positions that are posted. But in general, I think here's another thing. I'm 35. I've been in the workforce for quite some time. And so I've had quite a bit of I've had my fair share of experiences with a number of employers, and many of whom worked on issues like homelessness, for example. And we're grappling with like, well, what kind of language should we use? Do we use unhoused? Do we use homelessness and or homeless? I think that just spaces where we can grapple with like what everything means as far as like the question of social justice. I can be completely frank and say, like, in the past, I've also kind of felt like I need to be over the top competent before I can mention anything about social justice. And so, or anything about my sort of the way I was raised, or like my experiences. So just some thoughts there.
Thank you, Hugo. Yeah, I think everyone's thinking about transparency, about the opportunities, about the diversity practices, but also pay, right? So there's a lot to consider and a lot to think about when thinking about what is important to our students when looking for internships and jobs. And Shreya and Michelle, I think you spoke on this a little bit. So Shreya, if you want to get us started on how do you feel about organizations that have specific diversity opportunities or leadership programs? Do you feel like this positively impacts your experience or negatively?
Yeah. So I do feel positively because it shows that the organization or company recognizes that these voices are important and values them in the overall discussion or the overall work that the organization is putting out. So much so that they've gone to, create a program that, maybe recognizes these individuals beyond just their typical admissions process. For future healthcare workers, I think it's also very important that there are leadership programs for underrepresented people in medicine to be able to talk about the specific issues that their community faces, because there might be things like language barriers or economic barriers or additional sorts of thoughts about like receiving medicine or receiving care that might be completely glossed over in the current method of treatment. So I do think it's very important to have those voices brought in and also give a chance for like specific leadership opportunities or mentorship opportunities in these spaces. So yeah, I am in support of them. Thank you.
Yeah, I can continue on. I also agree with Shreya. I think leadership programs are really amazing. I think it's really important to create a pipeline so that students can really, hone in on skills, really learn things, especially if they know that they want to grow in that specific job or that specific industry. I think for diversity efforts, my opinion really depends on like specific support that's given into the program. So if you have like a diversity effort that focuses on bringing in people because of their race or maybe their socioeconomic status, there should be really specific resources in that program that address how those different identities impact the individual. And I think diversity efforts need to have like really specific and transparent metrics. And like a strategy to improve and measure those metrics should be also really transparent. I think the structure of diversity programs need to be really community-led, and it needs to really focus on, equity and bringing people up and kind of creating more accessibility into the workplace.
I would have to agree with Michelle. I think that my experiences have been positive, and what I have seen has been positive. Personally, I've came from an HBCU, which is a historically Black college and university, and pipeline programs are important. It's our way of getting our foot in the door, whereas we would have never been able to before. But I will say that it does need to be done correctly. These are marginalized groups, so they're low income. And they have different situations going on, and these companies need to be there to support them and have the resources for them, as Michelle mentioned. So as long as it's done the right way, it's not just thrown together. There's networking opportunities, there's mentoring opportunities, there is retention in the program. I think that it is important and positive.
I definitely agree with what Destiny said. Can you hear me? I switched to a headset. Okay, great. I agree with what Destiny said. Is definitely a foot in the door. I have a nonprofit. I've been working in a nonprofit for the past 12 years. And unfortunately, I think what I see a lot of times is that the diversity lies in the outreach and engagement team, and that's about it. So I think that it is important, definitely, to have specific goals to reach certain groups of folks to empower them and employ them, but remembering that those folks don't want to be pigeonholed, right? That, as I look at my grad degree, as I get it, I'm like, is the next 10 or 12 years of my life only looking at DEI director jobs, or can I actually go after, those VP of marketing jobs, right? So just remembering that, the positivity is, yes, it gets us through the door, but I've also seen it be very pigeonholing to individuals. So resources and education is just as important as folks have outlined.
Yeah, that really resonates with me, Terrell, and I think it was Destiny that mentioned this, but I actually, so I'm a consultant, but I'm in the urban planning world as well. That's my program, as you will see in your handout or whatever the document that was. And I think I don't want to be I have mixed feelings, frankly, about diversity programs. My biggest concern is this extractive. Are you just hoping to get not you second person singular? Are you hoping to kind of hear about my woes as someone that grew up a Latino in this country, or is there like what's at the end of that? I think that's something that I've kind of been grappling with. And also I think one-to-one mentorship is key. Frankly, I've been in a lot of workplaces where some things just don't make sense to me because maybe I grew up in a Latino household. And maybe now I'm in a predominantly white space, as you'll find in the, let's say, urban planning / real estate development world. And so maybe there are jokes that are being cracked or inside, sort of comments that are being made that I just don't understand. And so I think having a better sense of what is actually being discussed or what's actually happening. Like, I think that's key too. So yeah.
Thank you, Hugo. I love all the points that everyone made and the conversation happening in the chat too. And Michelle, you kind of spoke to this about having, you know, specific and measurable goals and how this should be applied to our DEI efforts too. Do you want to get us started on what recommendations you have for organizations that are hoping to increase access to underrepresented students?
Yeah, I think, there's obviously like the specific metrics, but I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to a shift in mentality. When like recruiting, there's a lot of emphasis on like merit and just like the amazing things that people have accomplished. But being the best, especially with like underrepresented students, like not a lot of underrepresented students have like the resources to have been the best of the best. And I think it's just about shifting that mentality of it's not just about finding the biggest fish in the biggest pond, but it's really about finding like the big fish in any size pond. And I think opening up that mentality to, look at everyone and, consider their background and experiences into like how accomplished they are and how much potential, like leadership potential that they have is really important. Just to kind of go along that like second sub point for like organizations in the beginning stage. I think like don't be afraid to think about the numbers. I think a lot of people kind of stray away from like thinking of things as quotas, but personally I think like knowing the numbers and really analyzing them is really important as like a means to an end. I think like if your current staff looks all male or all white or East Asian, it's really important to look at the applicant pool. And if that applicant pool is like still already like very skewed, then there's like a problem with like the outreach pre-application stage. And so I think the biggest thing is actually going out to like the different institutions that you might find underrepresented students and kind of really showing them that the value that they'll be getting from the employer, that's like we said earlier, like putting the salary in the job description, adding information about growth opportunities, even if it's brief, it's really helpful to just give that little like kind of plant that seed. I think students also need to know that like employers aren't really like saving them. And so establishing like a mutual power dynamic is really important. Like for example, I went to a networking event for this large company and there were 3 employees present. And the person who was like the analyst, like entry level position, she was a Black woman. And it kind of seemed like her like role at that event was to just talk about how amazing the job is, without really like being given the opportunity to put in input from like her other employees. And so it honestly just felt really like sad and like very impersonal too, to see someone being really tokenized, like starting from that recruiting stage. And so like really understanding like the value of like just people with diverse backgrounds and like experiences is really important. And like making sure to not like tokenizing and victimizing underrepresented students is also important, not only for like just like employer optics, but just like, kind of getting out the full potential of that employee.
Those are really great points, Michelle. So to build off of that, just going back to one experience that I had, I worked with a nonprofit called API Equality LA, which is like an organization that focuses on mental health initiatives for queer and trans Asian Pacific Islanders. And what I've noticed in several organizations is that the LGBTQ plus community is very underrepresented because frankly, it's kind of invisible. And there's like a continued bias that exists. So going back to Hugo's point for like one-on-one mentorship, I think it says a lot about organizations that there exist people that are willing and feel safe to be part of such a mentorship program and like be open about their identities and working with recent grads. In addition, I think it's important to offer resources such as housing or scholarships, like flexible pay or like vacations to be able to have familial obligations on the side, and making it a program that somebody doesn't have to think about like actually how to support themselves in addition to being a part of your program if it's an internship. I see this a lot in pre-health sort of opportunities where many of them are unpaid, many of them are like long hours or kind of like misrepresent what the actual role will be, because like it's required to have all of these opportunities and diversify sort of what your involvements are in order to be accepted into pre-health schools, or especially like PA school, they have literally like thousands of hours of clinical requirements. So just kind of thinking about these things that show that you actually value the students that are coming to be a part of your organization and you're not thinking about them as like free labor is really important.
I would have to agree with that. That was going to be one of my points. Having overall support for these, interns, essentially. Relocation stipends are a big thing. Housing is a big thing, especially because majority of these companies specific to media and entertainment are in LA or New York. And in addition to, school and trying to support yourself, you also have to worry about housing, meals, etc. So that would be very helpful. I would also say have partnerships with organizations that reach different diverse groups on campus. So as an example, again, me and Terrell are part of the Black Graduate Student Network, and we would love to partner with different employers to be able to have that access to our Black graduate students. Also, recruiting at HBCUs, diverse campuses, having information sessions, lunch with learners, networking events. I came from Spelman College, and we always had employers coming to our schools and networking events, and it was always packed because they embraced us being able to reach out to these companies and make those connections. I would also have to say having recruiters make conscious efforts to reach out to diverse students. I've heard of, this is more specific like in the tech space, but I've heard of people getting opportunities by just getting cold emailed by recruiters via LinkedIn. But unfortunately, I've only heard that from my white counterparts. So making a conscious effort to reach out to these students. And also lastly, leaving room for recent graduates as well. I've seen a lot of internships that, they only take students, but I think that extending that to students who have graduated within like 6 months would be appropriate as well, because there are students that, might not have the opportunity to secure something before they graduate. And once they graduate, they no longer have the connections with the school. So they're pretty much out of luck with opportunity. So extending a little bit of grace and leaving room for recent grads as well, I think would help.
I also, I would love to take a step back and say, when organizations are seeking to diversify, I think they also have to ask themselves, why are these folks underrepresented? And why are we in this position that we now have to diversify? Like we say in digital media, which I study, like algorithms aren't biased, the folks who make them are, so really looking internally to see, right, because you're going to now welcome these people here, and does the space DEI-B, right, will they belong, right? Because I've been invited many spaces where I've had to fight my entire time, whether it be because I'm Black or gay or Black and gay and the mix of both, right? Like I've had to fight for my existence to matter, but most importantly, my experience and education to be valued. And truly, I've literally had to say to people like, did you read my resume? And now I'm like the bad person, But I also think too, a lot of pipeline programs are very, very, as one who's worked in early childhood education for 12 years, I think that it does not just begin in, unfortunately, college and high school, right? Like folks need these sort of pipeline programs as early as possible to begin to think about themselves, right? I taught at a school in Philadelphia that, was majority of the folks there were cash poor, living at or below the poverty line. And I had a student say very frankly, right, like there is no doctors in my neighborhood. I'm not dreaming about being a doctor because I've never met one, right? And it was like that sort of realization was like, wow, that's right. Representation early, like seeing yourself in these places matter, right? Having someone say like, no, you belong in these places before you even know these places exist matter as well. So really focusing on the B and DEI.
Thank you, everyone. Terrell, I really love what you're saying about, the belonging being just as important as the other efforts in DEI. What questions about your identity and diversity initiatives do you want to ask employers but don't, if you want to get us started?
Yes, I always want to know, it's an age-old question, it's controversial, but I want to know, like the name question, right? Like seeing a name on a resume. And then I have another kind of point five there, like most of my experience has been working in LGBTQ plus IA organizations. If I go to an organization that doesn't have that mission or value, because that's just not what they do they see that and say, oh, this person can't work here because they've only worked at these, LGBTIA or queer affirming organizations, So when you look at someone's resume, how much about them can you see and do you use then to weight their work? That's all.
Will we have a chance to hear from some folks on the call? That'd be really an interesting conversation, actually. So maybe that'll be a whole nother panel discussion. That'd be great to kind of engage in that back and forth. So anyway.
Michelle, were there any questions about your identity and diversity initiatives that you'd want to ask employers but don't? And is there anything that employers should be adjusting on their website?
Yeah, I think so I actually I'm business right now. I actually left STEM coming into college because of like sexism that I experienced. And so it's a really big like workplace boundary that I have, that like I will not tolerate sexism at all. And so usually I just want to ask, like, how is conflict dealt with in the workplace? If someone says something that is like hurtful, how, like, what is the accountability measures that happen? I think also, just like on the flip side, not necessarily about my identity, but when we're focusing on like companies that have DEI values, I think it's really important to not just have like people in the C-suite be like have like one woman in the C-suite, or like people of color, like one person. But it's also important for like bigger corporations that are especially like external and like client based, like what do their clients look like? And do their clients also uphold the same values of DEI? Do they only look male and white primarily, or are they also like diverse? And so I think those are all kind of the bigger questions that I try to ask, but like I have to like usually kind of like sugarcoat it. But yeah, those would all be great to kind of mention. Maybe not on like the website, because like maybe client list on the website, but not like conflict resolution. But I think, like I said before, just like salary and wages, those things are also really important to include. And I think also deadlines, because I realize in my like internship search right now, there's like no deadlines ever listed in like any application. And I'm not sure if there's like some kind of HR reasoning for that, but like I remember going to like having a one-on-one with someone who worked in a company that I like recently applied to, and she was the person who actually told me the deadline, and it wasn't on the website. And so I think just really being like transparent and like not gatekeeping information, that's like really important. Just really helps with kind of making the application and recruiting accessible.
Yeah, to jump in, just as a sort of like woman in STEM, and specifically as like a South Asian woman, I know that sometimes my motivations are questioned. Like there's like a preconceived notion that like my family is forcing me to do this, or like sometimes I feel like that I guess it seems like there's a stereotype about me that may not exist for other students, or like I don't know. I just feel like sometimes it can feel like I'm a cutout, or like that they don't care as much about like individual things and stuff like that. But I guess just, do you consider that stuff when you get applicants, or like do you have preconceived notions? And I feel like honestly, in speaking about diversity initiatives in general, I really always wonder, like, do you actually care, or is this more of like a for show thing? And it's really hard to sort of like be able to like find that out as like an applicant. and going back to Michelle's point with like the gatekeeping of information, sometimes it's sort of like, what do you actually want us to do? Like there's sometimes invisible rules where it's like, oh, we actually want you to come to this in-person interview where you would actually be able to like afford to fly out, and you would be able to kind of like speak to everybody, and you'd get more information there, or like things like that. So I guess just increased transparency with those sorts of things as well.
Yeah, I like what some of you have shared. I do think that, I don't know, I haven't seen a company do this formally, like on their website, but I do think it'd be interesting to kind of see, like, how are folks building relationship, or how did folks end up at this company? I mean, 80% of jobs we get through a relationship. And so, but there's generally a core of individuals that make up the company, and they may not always be the ones in power, let's say, or formal leadership. And so I think having, and these are so obvious. I mean, when you go to like company lunches or even happy hour, you see the sort of, how you belong or don't belong. So that's always interesting to me. And also, I think that this question has been helpful for me in the past to ask other employers, like, what was it about me what was it about me that encouraged you to hire me, basically? Like, what specifically, how do you want me to contribute to this team? Or how do you see myself contributing to this team now and in the near future? And also, I think some of you have mentioned this, but sort of over communication and transparency about how to grow in the company. I think that's been really helpful. The other thing has been like knowing when I've stepped out of line, or like when I've said something that's not helpful, or because I missed a cue, let's say, not anything intentional. I think it's helpful to get us like to have a conversation about that, versus like, okay, well, now you've got you don't know what you're doing, and here is a formal reprimand or a write-up. I think conversations are great. I think that, yeah, just more conversations with leadership that are less punitive and more like I want to genuinely help you grow. I think that's incredibly helpful.
Destiny, did you want to jump in?
I would say I don't necessarily have a question, but there is one thing that I do ponder about in terms of my identity when it comes to employers. When there's adversity, essentially, am I going to be reprimanded or labeled as aggressive because I'm a Black woman? Just because we do have that stereotype, and that's why a lot of the times our voices are suppressed due to that stereotype. So I do kind of wonder, like, if things were to happen, not to be pessimistic, but if things were to happen, like, can I speak out? Would I be labeled as this person? Would I be labeled as someone that is hard to work with? And I feel like that stops a lot of women, Black women in particular, from speaking up, just whether it's issues at work or, opinions about things concerning their job or anything of that nature.
That's a really great point, Destiny. And actually, it's a really good segue into our next question. When you're employed at an organization, what makes you feel supported, and how do you feel valued?
Yeah, I think the first step is simply checking in, asking me how are you? How are you doing? How can I help you? How's your day going? Having like weekly or bi-weekly check-ins with your leaders. Also acknowledgement for good work. I know some of my peers have been reprimanded for, making mistakes. And look, again, these are interns making mistakes, and, getting in trouble for doing things that aren't wrong, but they kind of get through the cycle of like, I can't do anything right. Like I'm always getting feedback about my wrong work, but being acknowledged for the good work that we do. And also to piggyback off that, constructive criticism. So being able to get that feedback of, hey, like I see you're struggling here. How can I help you with this? As opposed to waiting until we get to the end of the internship and we're in the review period and you're telling me all these things that I could have worked on when we could have been dealing with that throughout the time. Also, again, sensitivity to, social global issues that are going on in the world. Like if there, is a mass shooting on a direct target of individuals and I identify with those people, are you going to ask me, hey, how are you doing? Are you okay? Do you need a day off? How are you digesting this? Just showing that you have, that you care. And also, lastly, helping to advance in the next stage of your career. Whether it's retention, networking opportunities, how can I get your foot in the door to other places if this isn't what you want to do, etc. Like having that support system from the beginning of the internship to the end and following the internship as well.
Preach, amazing. I would like to add, I think learning with leadership is always so cool when you have the opportunity to learn new skills together and practice them together. It really levels the playing field. When possible and appropriate, having that sort of 360 review. I feel like a lot of times I go into reviews and I'm like, but I have so much advice for you as well. When it can, especially as we evolve as a digital world and we evolve with so many tools, which brings me to my next point, not just being assigned things because you're like, oh, this is a millennial, so they must know how to operate this thing, which happens to me all the time in my job. And when I called it out, they were like, yeah, we are doing that really ageist thing. And I was like, yeah. So thinking about that too, but definitely I think, 360 reviews as much as possible, and also learning with leadership.
Yeah, I think just to kind of go over both of your answers, I think like, yes, check-ins are really important. Asking for feedback in like my area of expertise. I think it makes me feel like, the work that I'm doing is important and that I'm making an impact on like the decision-making levels as well. I think also kind of to go to like Terrell's point with, doing work that maybe isn't necessarily like in the job description. I think a lot of underrepresented students have experiences where they're kind of expected to do more than they like were originally asked to do. And usually it's not like compensated with like extra money or with like extra credit or even like a thank you. So I think like just, kind of maintaining that boundary and making sure like your employee is doing well is really important. And then also just kind of like giving a little bit of control to that person to, how they like execute processes and like different responsibilities they hold, and kind of like trusting your employee is really important just to make them feel valued.
Just to chime in, I feel like sometimes like just kind of casual and like interpersonal support can go a long way, whether that's like preparation ahead of networking events or maybe from your direct manager sharing information of like how the workplace works, or before you meet with more people or like you meet with a different department. Sometimes just having that additional support instead of having to figure everything out by yourself, or like the sort of like, like the cultural just sort of like norms can be like just like reduce a lot of anxiety and not make you feel like you're having to sort of like, take everything in. Speaking to medicine, there's a very strict hierarchy that kind of enables a lot of long hours, unpaid labor, overtime that isn't allowed to be reported. And frankly, a lot of suffering from like while you're working your way up the hierarchy. So knowing that there are systems to report this, or even just like reach out, like mental health is another big issue in medicine, just because you kind of like around you, it's not really the norm to look like you're struggling. So just even if it's like, whether it's like an anonymous way to sort of get help, or just anything that provides support, maybe even just like some of the smaller things like, you know, making sure you're getting enough like sleep or like a meal, or like having like, oh, this is flexible time where you can go like take a nap, or like this is time that you can do something else and you don't always have to be on. Also being on the younger side, workshops that build explicit skills, or if a stipend were provided to support my own interests, if I did want to go to a workshop so I wouldn't have to pay for that myself, that would make me feel really supported and valued, that you're investing in me growing my own skills. And as Destiny mentioned earlier, just sort of like additional support for like horizontal mobility, or sort of making those connects within an organization is also really great. Like if you were to have explicit time, or maybe like a day where, you know, maybe people that are higher up in an organization just devote that time to literally just like coffee chats, or like giving advice or mentorship to other people in the company, that would be just kind of an amazing experience, instead of having to go after that and like always sort of like approach it yourself. Just having that space to kind of where one day it's like welcomed could be really special.
Yeah, I appreciate what you just mentioned, Shreya, and Michelle. I think you also talked about this, but just having a sense of what the big picture is at the company. I mean, in my line of work, there are so many work streams. I'm a part of a campaign, and you know, we've got our comms team, we've got our external affairs, and we've got folks doing the outreach. And something that's always been interesting to me is, well, how do all these puzzles fit together? Versus, you know, stay in your lane. This is your work stream. Outreach is it. Like, don't go around asking any more questions, you know, like stay in your lane, like contact the CBOs, or, you know, talk to X people because, you know, you can't talk to business owners and that kind of thing. I think it's helpful to have, yes, I think guardrails, of course, are absolutely important. I think it's strategic. But I also see a lot of value in sort of that, creating those intentional spaces where we can talk to others of different work streams and kind of figure out, like strategize as far as like how we are going to more intentionally work together. So building those relationships is absolutely key. And I already mentioned this, but I definitely feel valued when I'm invited to be a part of a decision-making process. I think that, you know, everybody likes to joke about those meetings that could have been an email. Or, you know, or those meetings where you know, it's like, okay, you're telling me everything, not you're telling me everything I know, but you're talking to me versus bringing me alongside and kind of working through this with me. I think that's incredibly helpful, just to and I think it was Destiny or Terrell that mentioned the 360. I really like that phrase, the 360 review. Is that what you called it? But you know, it's like that back and forth, that sort of call and response of like, you know, I'm going to say something, you're going to say something, and then we're going to create something from this. I mean, I'm not knocking the hierarchy or the, you know, the structures. I think there's a lot of value in all of that, and I think it creates, you know, some. I think it of course provides an opportunity for the kind of efficiency that companies need. But I do also think that, you know, that they're, especially now, I think younger generations are kind of saying like, hey, like, we'd like to be included in the decision-making process. And so it's interesting how that's panning out. But again, I'm so used to working with significantly older folks than I am. And where I've experienced that, you know, just time and again of like, okay, all right, that's cool. Glad to hear that that's what you think, but this is how we're doing things. And so it's like, okay, well, I guess there's not much else to say here, but I do think there's value in that kind of communication. So
And can I just add really quickly, the 360 review too, I think is really good written as well. It doesn't have to be always a verbal thing because that could be very daunting, I know, to say, okay, now, but I think written also because people think a lot more when they're writing things, you know? So just saying it's a very good process too. And it is a professional development training tool for the person, for both, you know, as the person has to really get skilled in giving adequate feedback.
Thank you, Terrell. And I really like the way that you put that 360 review, because we really feel valued when our feedback is being considered too, right? So something to consider too when really creating these safe spaces for our students. I also want to be mindful of time and give our audience an opportunity to ask any questions they may have. So if you have any questions, if you could either raise your hand or put it in the chat or send it directly to me and I can ask the question for you. If not, I do have a few more questions, but I want to give you all the time to ask any you may have. While we all wait, can you all describe what equity and inclusion initiatives would exist at your ideal organization? I know a lot of you have described transparency, 360 review, but if there's anything else that you think of that would exist, we would love to hear that. Hugo, if you want to get us started.
Yeah, let me take some more time to think about that one. But I think it's, you know, I think a lot of it has been already mentioned. I think the transparency as far and that mobility in the company is huge, like having an actual trajectory. I mean, one of the things as I pivot in my career that I'm experiencing is this this sort of, you know, in order to pivot, or first of all, in the past, I've experienced like a lot of employers that haven't exactly laid out like this is what it's going to take to climb, let's say, to grow in this company. It's a, and I'm not saying I shouldn't do the work to ask those questions myself, but I do think it's very helpful to have that, you know, this is the way to grow in this company. So, I mean, it's just transparency and over communication of information. I think that's incredibly helpful. So.
If I can just add on, I don't have like real professional experience with diversity, but like I think it's important to know that like with trainings, like implicit bias trainings, things like that, all of that is really important as like baseline knowledge, but it really can't stop there. You know, the reason for all these policy changes and having like a separate branch with DEI, it's at the end of the day, it's to make sure that there's a mindset change and a mentality change. And all of that is to say that it has to be really sustainable in terms of creating something that's continuous and something that is active in its efforts to make the workplace more representative, and to think about not just like the immediate like people who are affected, but by like even the indirect stakeholders who are affected. Are they affected in good or bad ways, and how are they being affected? And all of those kind of questions can lead to the metrics that like can be used to kind of improve all of these things. I think it's also to incentivize diversity efforts. So like not having them on like a Friday 5 p.m. thing and like making it like unpaid, like voluntary work, but to really make it a very crucial and institutionally supported effort. And I don't have like personal experience with this, but I've heard from some people that like usually like going to a diversity workshop or training like during the job is kind of looked down on because it means that you're not doing work. And I think kind of taking away that stigma and taking away that like initial barrier is really important, to show that like it's just as important as improving profits.
Thank you, Michelle. That was all really well said. We do have one question in the chat from Kelly, which is a really great question to end off the panel. How would you like to be introduced to different support systems offered within an organization? And if it is something that a recruiter touches on in the interview process, would you like to be reintroduced, introduced again during the post-selection training process, or possibly again afterwards? How do you all feel? Destiny, go ahead.
Yes, I would say I would like to see it from the beginning in the job description. I want to be able to see what support systems you guys have from the beginning. I was kind of thinking of it as like in a way, like how you all see our resumes. That's the first thing that you see when you look at us, like what we have to bring to the table. I would like that to be reciprocated in job descriptions. And following that with the interviews, it would be nice for the recruiters to touch base on that, kind of go into depth about, how we can be supported. And even following that, once we do get an interview with like a manager or a senior vice president, they should be able to know these same systems as well. It is a red flag when, you ask those kind of questions in the interview and the leadership can't even tell you what support system that they have because they don't know or they don't utilize them. So from the beginning, I believe that we should be introduced to that.
I'm a little unclear as to what the question is. Sorry. I'm sorry, Terrell, go ahead.
No, please. Clarity. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm a little unclear as to what the question is. Like, are you saying, Kelly, that like, is this a matter of like affinity groups or like what is I mean, I guess in general, though, I'll answer that. I do think like Destiny mentioned, I think it's incredibly helpful to have that conversation from the very beginning. I mean, even things like I'm thinking of the program EAP, for example, like even having that conversation, like, hey, you might have questions about, you might need some counseling, for example. Maybe there was a crisis in your family, and you're like trying to balance everything. I think that's like just putting out there, like, these are all of the resources that we have available. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question though.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I figured it might be a little bit unclear, but specifically for me as a recruiter, this is something that I typically touch on in the interview process from the beginning, first stage of my interview process all the way through. But as everybody was speaking, one of the things that really came to mind for me was that I don't think there's as much follow through as there probably should be or could be after that fact, right? After somebody accepts a position, I think that one thing that kind of became top of mind was, what, we should probably talk about this again in the post-selection process in terms of what does it actually look like to, take advantage of some of the resources offered here? How can I get involved within some of these different affinity groups within the organization? And then I think, going even further, once somebody has completed the post-selection process, if it would be beneficial if we bring that up again, just to make sure that people, are aware of what's offered and aware of how to get involved. So you guys have been very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, really quickly, Kelly, too, because I feel like a lot of times when I find out about resources, it's because I'm at that point where I'm like, I need resources, so yes, as early as possible. And I saw that there is a question, I think from Massimo, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, about when, well, I don't want to read the question because I'm not the facilitator, but about when speaking to recruiters, what's important in DEI. I think Michelle talked a lot about data and I love it because I'm like, yes, numbers always help. I think also being able to truly see the track record of that organization working with certain groups. It's very easy to say resource groups are here. I'm going to be frank that sometimes it does feel laborious as a Black gay person to join a resource group for organization. I don't know who is it truly benefiting sometimes. So I think though definitely data speaks, and truly seeing those folks, whether it be through charitable work or through the work that they do as a nonprofit or such, put their money where their mouth is, I guess people say. Yeah.
Thank you, Terrell. And for others, the question was, when speaking with recruiters, what features or accolades related to DEI speak to you the most? For example, recruiting data, ability to join employee resource groups, awards for being a top-rated place to work. These are a few things that Massimo listed. We have time for one more answer if anyone wanted to jump in, but Terrell, I think you gave a really great answer. Michelle or Shreya, did you have anything to add? No, it's okay.
Yeah, personally, sorry, I was just gonna say I haven't had as much like job experience yet, so I can't really correlate some of these like features or accolades to how well the work environment actually treated me. So this might be a better question for someone else.
And that's totally fine. Terrell, I think you gave a great answer. Hugo, did you want to add something?
Yeah, to answer Massimo's question, yeah, I think I read this once from a mentor who wrote this on LinkedIn, and she was kind of upset about this, but she said, you know, I think it's a good idea for others to approach me before they apply. And so I'm thinking about how that might apply to recruiters and those that are being recruited. And I think that it's helpful to say, hey, there's this position available. And as you consider this possibility, I'd like to also connect you to one or two other people that work either in the industry or in that company that would give you a better sense of what the company offers. I mean, I can think of several situations where I have walked into an interview and I mean, it was like, hey, are you available for an interview tomorrow? It's like, you know, I'd love to be there, except I haven't met anybody in the company. And also like, yeah, I'll do my due diligence, but you don't want to miss out on the opportunities. So you end up, so, you know, in the past, I've ended up saying, sure, let's go. Was that necessarily, was I set up for success? Well, you know, I can't exactly say that was the case, but hey, I gave it a shot. But I think it is helpful to connect for a recruiter to connect them to other people in that company or just other people in the industry, even if that job placement doesn't work out or that interview doesn't work out.
Thank you, Hugo. I also want to point to Michelle's answer in the chat to those who didn't see it. But it is 3 o'clock and I want to be mindful of people's time. I want to echo what Terrell said in the chat. You all being here really shows and demonstrates that you are doing the work and really should congratulate you all. And I really want to thank our panelists for being here and speaking on their experiences. We learned a lot from you all, and I really hope everyone gained some great information to improve recruiting practices in the future. Thank you all for being here and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.